Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. We have a very large call planned for today with nearly 2,000 people, maybe over 2,000 people by now registered. I see there's already 700 people on, so I do want to give a couple of minutes at least to allow for more people to join before we start the agenda. So we'll be back with you soon. Thanks for your patience and thanks for joining. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. I'm going to give it a couple minutes to give more people time to get on the line before we get started. So we'll be back with you in a couple minutes. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm going to give it another minute or so. We're at nearly 1,000 participants already, and we have nearly 2,000 registered. So I do want to give a little bit more time to make sure more people can join. It's great to see you all in the chat box. Thanks for introducing yourselves. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a minute or so. I'm going to let a few more people join, and we're also just working out a logistical issue with our first speaker. So we'll get started very soon. Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Diane Yantel. I'm President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And thank you for joining our weekly national HoUSed call for universal, stable, and affordable housing. We have a very large call today. We have nearly 2,000 people registered, and it looks like we've got about 1,200 people on the line already. So thank you for joining. We have an incredible lineup of guest speakers today to talk about some of the most urgent and pressing issues that are facing the lowest income and most marginalized renters in our country. We'll hear first from Andrea Nika Morris, the Executive Director of Housing NOLA on what we know so far about the impacts of Hurricane Ida on the lowest income renters and people experiencing homelessness, and what needs to be done in the short, medium, and long run to help the region and the people fully and equitably recover from the disaster. Then we'll be joined by Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to talk about the expiration of the eviction moratorium, slow rate of spending emergency rental assistance funds, the need for immediate long-term solutions, and what Congress and all of us can do. And Gene Sperling, Senior Advisor to President Biden, will again join us and talk about the administration's latest actions to protect renters from evictions. So before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to see if we were able to connect with Andrianica. I know that she is she's in Louisiana. She's not able to connect via Zoom, but she is calling in. So Tori, have we been able to locate Andrianica on the call?
No, not yet.
Okay, so Tori's going to work on that. I do want to say thanks for everybody who's introducing themselves in the chat box. It's great to see you all and to know where you're calling in from. Please continue to do so. If you have questions throughout the call, put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track, especially with so many people on the line. And we do occasionally have people join as an anonymous attendee, and I will just say that we will prioritizing answering questions from people who are registered under their name. So if you are registered as an anonymous attendee, I encourage you to register under your name so that we can answer the questions that you ask as they come in. So we're going to continue working on this technical issue, and we're going to locate Andrianica as soon as possible. So I think first, while we're doing that, I'm going to ask Sarah Sadian, our VP of Public Policy at NLIC, to step in and give our update, the legislative update on long-term solutions. And Sarah, I'll let you know if we get Andrianica on the line and need to interrupt. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. A lot has happened since last week, so I want to cover a lot of details here. Last week, we did see the Supreme Court invalidate the federal eviction moratorium, taking away a protection that millions of renters had relied on to remain stably housed during the pandemic. We had expected the Supreme Court to make this announcement, unfortunately, but we're hoping that we could get as much time as possible under the new eviction moratorium before that happened. In response to the Supreme Court decision, though, we've seen some action from members of Congress that you should all be aware of. We've seen some progressives led by Representative Presley, Gomez, Ocasio-Cortez, and Cori Bush, and others lead a group of about 60 Democrats last Friday in urging a vote on legislation to enact an eviction moratorium. And while that is certainly needed at the federal level, we know that there are really significant challenges to getting that enacted. It's nearly impossible to see that become law. We know this because last month, when the previous eviction moratorium expired, Speaker Pelosi, House Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters, and others fought really hard to get that legislation through the House. But unfortunately, it wasn't able to garner the support that it needed. And we know that even if it were to pass the House, there's really little to no opportunity to pass it through the Senate because of unanimous Republican opposition to it. So in light of those challenges, we've seen that Chairwoman Waters is planning to advance legislation that would make changes to the emergency rental assistance program to help expedite those funds, sort of recognizing that if we can't have a moratorium, there might be an opportunity to help get those funds out the door as quickly as possible, which I know all of you guys have been focusing on for a long time. So she put out a statement last week calling for legislation that would make some reforms. I want to go through a couple of what those things are and how we're engaging with her staff on that. So among many other things, she's looking for legislation that would require programs to use self-attestation to prove eligibility under the program. As you all know, self-attestation is allowed. Treasury has really encouraged programs to use that flexibility, but many are not. And so requiring programs would be a step forward in simplifying those processes. We also know that she's called for requiring direct-to-tenant assistance options. That is required for the second round of ERA2, but is not required for ERA1. We think that's a really important step forward. She also calls for legislation that would direct Treasury to do more outreach and require grantees to do more outreach, and it would provide $25 million more to help fund those efforts, and to require poor performing grantees to put together a performance improvement plan that would describe how they will adopt those best practices to further improve their programs. All of those are things that the National Low-Income Housing Coalition had encouraged Maxine Waters to look into, so we're really glad to see that in the bill. They haven't released text, though. I want to be clear about that. I'm still working on it. So we've been working closely with her office. There were some proposals that were in her statement that give us some concern. So one of them is allowing landlords to apply directly for assistance after providing notice to their renters, but not necessarily requiring sign off by the renter. That is something that we are very concerned about. We know that without really strong renter protections, that could lead to landlord fraud. It could also lead to greater housing insecurity if we're not seeing the interests of landlords and renters really tied together. And so we've encouraged her to consider other measures to include in the bill, things like requiring that programs exhaust all other avenues before they can do this. So requiring that they simplify their applications, that they provide direct-to-tenant assistance, that they work with nonprofits as intermediaries, and fund legal aid to help support tenants. And then only then, if they were to go forward with this proposal, that they would only do so if tenants are still stably housed in their homes for at least 120 days after receiving that assistance to their landlord, that there's really documented evidence that landlords and programs use their best efforts to notify and contact the renters, that landlords are setting aside and vacating any eviction judgments or rescinding any eviction filings, and that courts are notified that evictions are stalled, among other protections that we're encouraging them to look at. Beyond those items, we're also encouraging Congresswoman Waters to include in the bill things that we think would also help expedite the ERA program. We're looking at things like creating a presumption that all income eligible households meet the criteria that they have a COVID hardship. We've heard from a number of folks that even with self-attestation, that's been difficult. And we know that that presumption exists in other COVID relief programs like the state and local fiscal relief funds. We're also encouraging them to look at things like a safe harbor provision to encourage programs to expedite funding. Again, something that we've heard from program administrators is that despite really the enormous flexibility that Treasury provides, they're concerned about having those funds clawed back later. And so having a safe harbor provision is one of the many recommendations we're making to Waters about how to facilitate these funds to get it out further. It's really unclear to see what the path forward is on this bill. We know that they're looking to have a vote out of committee on the 13th. It's unclear if this could pass under a budget reconciliation process or if it would have to go under regular order. And to that end, it's really hard to predict, at least at this point for us, whether or not it would receive enough Republican votes in the Senate to move forward. So we're paying very close attention. We're engaging with Chairwoman Waters, trying to make this as strong of a bill as possible and seeing where it goes from there. In terms of an infrastructure bill, we are really coming down to the wire here. And so I want to just give an update for how folks can be engaged on this. So last week, after some last minute drama, the House approved the budget resolution that sets the stage for a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. We saw that some House moderates had threatened not to vote for the budget resolution if the House didn't also vote to approve the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Of course, that's diametrically opposed to what many progressives had been pushing for. And it really just shows you how tenuous this process is. The House can only afford to lose about 3 votes. The Senate can't afford to lose any Democratic votes, which means that we cannot take anything for granted. We have to be engaging with all members of Congress, every single one of them in the House and the Senate, especially your Democrats, and urging them to pass this budget reconciliation bill as quickly as possible and to include our housing priorities. So where do things stand now? Well, now that the House and Senate has passed that budget resolution, the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee are drafting their legislation to divvy up that allocation among the various programs. The plan is for the House committee to vote on the bill on September 13th. They've set that date for a vote, after which it will head to the House Budget Committee and then combined with all the other bills into one giant package to get a vote on the House floor. We'll likely see it go to the Senate side. They might make some changes. If they make changes, they'll go back to the House. But all of this is to say that once that bill is released for a vote in committee on the 13th, it'll be extremely difficult to make changes to it, which is why our advocacy is so important this week and next week. We have to keep up the pressure. We have to be educating our members of Congress about why these resources are so important. So I do want to give a little brief update, if I can, about what our priorities are, because there's been some updates there. So now that the allocations are out, we needed to make some adjustments. The overall allocations for the Banking Committee and House Financial Services Committee are $332 billion and $339 billion. There's a slight difference there. That's because of jurisdictional issues, but overall, it's a huge amount of money, really robust resources, but not enough to cover all of our priorities. If you remember, we had been calling for rental assistance to cover every single eligible household. That's not possible under this allocation, but we can make really significant gains towards that vision of having a universal rental assistance program. So we're still pushing for the full amount of funding. Were you gonna cut me off, Diane?
I am in just about a minute. Okay, can you wrap up in about a minute?
Yes.
I see Andrea Nako is able to join.
I will wrap it up really quickly. So we're still pushing for $70 billion for public housing, $45 billion for the Housing Trust Fund, and we've scaled down our ask for rental assistance to $180 billion, which is enough to cover every single household with incomes below 15% of area median income, and everyone who receives Social Security, SSI, below 30% of AMI. We have a lot more details. I can get into that later, but for now, I'll turn it back over to you, Diane.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sarah, for that really helpful update. It looks like we have Andrea Nika on the line now. I just want to double check. I saw her name there for a moment. There she is. Oh, terrific. Andrea Nika, it's really good to see you. I am so appreciative of your joining this. I think you're in Louisiana somewhere. I hope you're someplace safe, and we really appreciate you joining. I want to welcome you and introduce you. Certainly, you know, rescue and recovery efforts are still underway in New Orleans and coastal Louisiana, and most of the region is still without power. So we're so grateful to have Andrea Nika join the call today. She is a survivor of many Louisiana hurricanes, and she knows better than anyone just how inequitable and unjust the recoveries often are. She's the executive director of Housing NOLA, NLHC's state partner in Louisiana. Andrea Nika, thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane, for having me here. I'm trying to move out of the wind. I don't want to feel like so many of our visitors, when they come down, they like to do that good little bit of disaster coverage. I don't think you guys can see me though. It doesn't look like my video is working, but that's okay.
We can see you.
Oh, you can? Okay, yep. All right, well. So good afternoon, everybody. Diane and Brooke and Tori set this up before we knew that this was gonna be so apropos that you guys would hear from Louisiana today of all days. But we should have, because yesterday was the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And the joke that we have made is that Ida was an uninvited guest to the worst Sweet 16 party ever, unfortunately, making it quite the ignominious date in Louisiana history. So first thing that Diane and her team wanted me to talk about is Ida, this massive hurricane which they're going to go back and confirm the numbers, but it's officially now a Category 4. It is the worst storm to make landfall in over 100 years in Louisiana. It eclipses Laura and Delta, which devastated Lake Charles last year. And it does eclipse Hurricane Katrina. As everybody might remember, Hurricane Katrina didn't actually make landfall in Louisiana. It sideswiped us in New Orleans, and what caused the catastrophe that is Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana was what we call a federal flood, the breaches of the levees, and that's what caused the monumental disaster. But that actually happened a day after Katrina had bugged out. So Ida is not like her predecessor. She hit us head on. She was supposed to come on landfall a little bit west of the city, a lot west of New Orleans, and she looked like she was headed for Baton Rouge, our capital. She did not. She jogged a little bit right at the last minute, and she rolled on through to the river parishes where I'm from, where I sheltered and where I always take shelter, and into Hammond. And that's where you're having a lot of rooftop rescues today in the LaPlace area, areas that still don't have the levee protection that has unfortunately become now standard if you're going to be below the I-10. They're building it now. My hometown of Edgard is actually on the West Bank and doesn't need a levee system. So other than a tremendous, and I have pictures, I'll send them to Diane and Victoria and Brooke, and they can share. We've got, it's also mobile home country, and this is an area where mobile homes just didn't survive, just didn't really make it. And this brings what happened with Ida and what we have been reflecting on to connect it to the original topic that I got on and Sarah was talking about, and that Diane and the team wanted to talk about here, was how the eviction moratorium, the overturning of the eviction moratorium was playing out. Well, it's to be expected, unfortunately. The people who could leave were more well off. We did not have a big runway for this one. People got the official word to leave, that you might want to leave about Thursday and Friday, and then people made their decisions. They kept looking, and those of us who could leave left on Thursday, on Friday, and Saturday. That wasn't a lot of people who were able to leave, and so what you have left in New Orleans are people who could not afford to leave, who are dealing with not as devastating an event as folks in the river parishes further west of New Orleans, but it's going to get up to 100 degrees in the next couple of days. They don't have power in New Orleans. We're not sure when that's going to be restored. We're waiting to hear back. There's been some press conferences today, but we don't know for sure. And of course, the people who are in New Orleans who couldn't leave because they didn't have anywhere to go, or they couldn't afford to leave, are the folks who are the most vulnerable. And now, one thing that happened is the roof blew off our courthouse, so won't be any eviction hearings for the foreseeable future. And our city hall and really our courthouse is where our criminal proceedings take place. But the civil district courthouse, all of those things are closed, so we won't be seeing any evictions in New Orleans. Our neighbors like Jefferson Parish, they're dealing with devastation. They don't actually have any water. They have a boil order, and they're having problems actually pumping water through the state. That's also one of the areas that area got the second largest allocation of rental assistance, and they're fairly infamous for the fact that they've not gotten more than $3 million out the door since they rolled the program out. They've been allocated about $28 million, and they've got about $2-3 million out the door. So again, the people who are here are dealing with the double whammy. They've been struggling with COVID, the financial implications of COVID, the housing implications of COVID, and now that's been exacerbated by the worst storm that hit Louisiana in over 100 years. So we're seeing interventions. People who have been able to evacuate are able to sign up with FEMA and get into hotels. And this is something that we've been talking about with the National Local Housing Coalition's partnership. If we had activated the COVID non-congregate housing shelter program and gotten folks into hotels, they would be better off, and there could be a more centralized evacuation point if they need to. Because that's one of the things that we were worried about is getting homeless off the street during the storm. We were not as great as we could have, and because all we were offering them was congregate housing, traditional shelter inside of a dual disaster, coming out of this horrific rain, coming out of this wind, but also what we have for you is not something with privacy, not something where you can be comfortable, but a traditional shelter where you may feel like you're at risk of being exposed to COVID. So, my phone's actually ringing. That's hilarious. So I'm not going to take up much more time than that. We, here in Louisiana, though, again, back to the original point that Diane and her team wanted me to talk about, we have some of the lowest allocations of rental assistance in the country. And we've recently gotten to about $67 million out of $553 million, which is pretty pathetic. And we've been striking out with our landlords and tenants working together to persuade our elected officials to move this money faster. They just seem to not get it. And so we're going to need help, and we're going to need the federal government's help to make sure that money doesn't continue to sit, because Louisiana has a terrible track record in these matters. So Diane, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys, unless anybody has any specific questions that they want me to share, because people may be tuning in from other parts of the country as evacuees, and they may have questions they want me to answer.
Thank you, Andrea very much for your insights and your time. It's a really valuable time, especially right now. There are many, I know you can't see it right now, but there are dozens and dozens of comments to you in the chat box, sending thoughts and prayers, and
thank y'all.
And sending offers to help in any way. And so I actually would ask you the question of, since we're about to have Speaker Pelosi join and her team are on the line, what you would say is most needed from Congress in the days and months and ahead in order to help the people of Louisiana and the Gulf Coast recover equitably and completely.
So we've got to make sure everybody gets stabilized in safe, decent, sustainable housing right now. Because, and again, that housing has to be mindful of COVID, right? Putting people together, overcrowding them. This is the exact kind of worst situation. If you have a family member who has running water and you don't, you may go stay with them. If they have power and you don't. So you're going to have more people doubling up out of necessity. And COVID is, and again, while you might have been uncomfortable 2 years ago, what you're worried about now is the exposing your family to COVID. So we've got to get FEMA, we've got to get these FEMA programs, these hotel programs up and running, and we've got to get people stabilized. People who already were able to evacuate, make sure that they can connect to the FEMA program and get their hotels paid for and their hotel stays extended. And then if people want to leave because they can't take this heat, again, the people who did not evacuate, many of them did so because they could not afford to, because because the most vulnerable people who couldn't evacuate anyway. That happens while the city figures out how to get the lights back on, how Jefferson Parish figures out how to get the water turned back on, how St. John and St. Charles deal with their crises. Anyone who wants to leave and can go somewhere safe, and can go somewhere that is, and not just safe because of Ida, but safe because of COVID. And that means hotel rooms, that means short-term rentals, but that does not mean the Astrodome, that does not mean rec rooms, that does not mean the kind of evacuations that we saw typical with hurricanes and other disasters. We've got to get folks into homes of their own, or at least places that they can call their own for a time being.
Thanks, Andrea. And one more question that's come in from a few people asking what, if anything, was done to keep people who are experiencing homelessness, especially unsheltered people, prior to the storm, to keep them safe during the storm, and what solutions from Congress are needed to get them housed after the storm. So
we did what we typically do. You we lowered the barriers on our low barrier shelters and asked them to come into traditional congregate shelters. Some of them refused because of COVID, because of other challenges. And this is something that we saw before, Ida. We've seen this during COVID. What's getting people off the street is the offer of a hotel room during COVID, because they understand that congregate shelter is inherently risky. And so the FEMA COVID program, again, NOAA, working with Diane and her team, and NOAA, we've talked about this at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition over the last few months since President Biden extended that program and expanded it to 100% reimbursement. And we have watched in horror as state and local municipalities have failed to take advantage of it. Congress has to do more than put these programs in place. There has to be a stick, and there has to be some requirements to address these needs. And that if that means bypassing state and local municipalities to work boots on the ground, then that's what needs to happen, because we've got to start looking for outcomes, not simply good policies and good programs that are not being implemented.
Couldn't agree more, Andrea-Nika. And as always, NLHC and our broader Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition will be at your side and have your back for all of the days and months and years ahead in the long recovery. And thank you so much for joining
We
today.
appreciate that, Diane. We appreciate you giving us this forum today to get that word directly to Speaker Pelosi and to her team. And we thank the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. You guys have been with us since Katrina and before that, honestly. But the modern disaster era is begun with Katrina. So unfortunately, we're another bookmark, another chapter in that disaster era. And I think we've got to get better. We've got to do what so much you and your team have called for nationally. We've got to get housing. We've got to make sure we put housing first. We've got to guarantee housing for all. And then we can survive these tragedies with a little more assurance and certainty.
Yes. Thank you so much, Andrea-Nika. Much more to come in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So we're going to turn now to our next topic of the Supreme Court's overturning the federal eviction moratorium, the slow rate of spending, emergency rental assistance, and the desperate need for long-term solutions to the housing crisis in our country. As you all know, the Supreme Court essentially overturned the CDC eviction moratorium last week, and the ruling is devastating because its effects will be so severe and so long-lasting. 6.5 million households remain behind on rent, having fallen behind during the pandemic. And for them, the moratorium was a lifeline, and it was the last federal protection keeping them stably housed during the pandemic. And now, as the Delta variant surges and hospitals overflow throughout the country, these families are at heightened risk of losing their homes. And there's no doubt that Congress should enact a broad eviction moratorium for the duration of the pandemic, just like they should have throughout the last 18 months. But the reality is the politics of it mean that they can't, and they very likely won't. With unanimous Republican opposition in the House and the Senate and the filibuster in place, they don't have the votes. So governors and mayors need to step up, and Congress needs to act in other ways to protect renters in the short, medium, and long term. So to discuss all of this, we are so honored to be joined by the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Speaker Pelosi made history as the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House, and she's widely considered one of the most powerful and effective congressional leaders in American history. Under her leadership, Congress enacted the Affordable Care Act to provide health care coverage for millions of families, as well as legislation impacting everything from climate change, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, child nutrition, and more. Her leadership ensured that Congress provided historic protections and resources for tenants and people experiencing homelessness during the pandemic. And last month, she led an effort to get Congress to enact an eviction moratorium. Now she's leading Congress to enact a comprehensive infrastructure and economic recovery package that could include up to $330 billion in affordable housing investments. So welcome back to our call, Speaker Pelosi. Thank you so much for joining us. We are honored, and it's a pleasure to have you back on this call. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for this opportunity to be with you once again. As you know, we were together last year, the earlier days of the pandemic, and had the benefit of your thinking and of the coalition. at that time. I did want to say that I accept any compliment you give to me on behalf of the House Democrats, because there's nothing that we accomplish that doesn't speak to the courage of the members of the House Democratic Caucus. And further to that point, nothing that we have done in a major way would happen without the outside mobilization. We can maneuver all we can in the House of Representatives, in the Congress, and try to be as persuasive and, shall we say, persuasive as possible. But without the outside mobilization of people weighing in, we cannot accomplish any good things. And so when we go forward with the President Biden's Build Back Better initiative, it will be with the intellectual resource that all of you have been, with the outside mobilization that you are doing, that we will do the best possible job. I did have the opportunity to listen to your first half an hour, and I heard what you said about Maxine's initiative, as well as to hear Andronika's report from New Orleans. Thank you for that very, again, values-based report about the need for us to solve the housing crisis long before another storm, pandemic, or whatever. I have a grandson, a student in New Orleans, and it took him, a young man, 10 and a half hours to get out. Imagine if you have family to deal with and other things. It just was not a good option for many people, and we need to recognize that. To Andronika, I would say that your governor, Governor Bell Edwards, he has been relentless in calling for assistance for Louisiana, even since the last storms, asking for huge amounts of money in infrastructure and the rest, to not only build back, but also to anticipate better what could happen there. And this storm is on record, I think, is the worst that ever hit. And it hit Louisiana once again, as we know. So thank you for your leadership, for your courage, for the important suggestions that you are making. And yes, it all comes back down to us honoring the Gospel of Matthew. When I was homeless, you gave me shelter. This isn't about giving, it's about what it works well for our country. I say this to all of you proudly of my mother. When I was a girl from first grade, when I went to college, my father was still the mayor of Baltimore, and my mother, as first lady, took on the affordable housing agenda. And was really brutal. I mean, in those days, we're talking about the 50s and the 60s, and it's very tough now. But even then, and her saying was that how can we teach children love and respect and all if we don't love and respect them enough to make sure that they have reliable, good, clean housing? I was very proud that when she died, the Baltimore Sun used that as the headline of her obituary. But so this is in the DNA of many of us, that this housing issue is fundamental, not just as a housing issue, but as a psychological issue for our children, as a security issue for our families. So again, when we come up against some of these issues that would be helpful in terms of a pandemic or a hurricane or something, we're really having to look at what is fundamentally a problem underneath it all, any given day of the week. So that's what we hope to do in the legislation. I thank you, Diane, for reviewing the legislation, the Build Back Better legislation for the people, Build Back Better with women for the people. And if you have some questions, I'll talk about that, because it's important in terms of your activism on it. But to get to this point, I want to thank the administration. I'm glad that Gene Sperling is going to be in. Thank the administration for being part of this funding altogether in the rescue package, which Gene Sperling is honchoing the implementation of. Thank you, Gene, for your leadership. The president was part of putting in the money that Maxine Waters took the lead on for the funding to help prevent, which had a moratorium, but also had the funding. Maxine's legislation, I heard you review, and that is very important as well. I hear the critique that you made of it and some of the changes you'd like to see. Maxine is planning to have it marked up on September 13th, as you said. So some of the, you have made those known to me outside this call as well. But it is important that the consensus that she is building, it prevails on that day. We have to work with the Senate on what can pass the Senate and the muster of the parliamentarian in light of the filibuster rules and the rest of that. As was said, we can't pass this right now in the Senate. We can't pass it in the Senate. So what we want to do is let's get results where we can. The most important thing, and many of our members, we've had these events throughout the country in different communities. I've been to La Raza and different aspects of my community, whether it's in Chinatown or at any areas where we can have culturally appropriate, linguistically appropriate as well, people reaching out to the community to say, this is your right, live up to it, and not live up to it, sign up for it so that we can live up to our obligation to you. So much more has happened since this moratorium seems to have expired. And well, not in California, we have it for the month of September, but many places it has. Some of you have been very active in getting moratorium extensions in your own states. But right now, the bill passed, the money's there. Maxine took the leadership to make sure that people could stay in their homes. From my childhood, as I told you, just the idea that people would be on the street, baby cribs and people's belongings. And I've seen that happen in San Francisco, and it breaks your heart, but it should break the practice so that that doesn't happen to people. It doesn't happen to people. So again, we have the bigger issue to address, which we do in the Build Back Better legislation. But for now, we've got to, and thank the administration, they got the money out right away. The Biden administration got the money out right away. What we need to do is shine a bright light for on it all so that the money is released. As I said, we've been doing that, each of us in our own communities. We couldn't do it without you. You command so much respect. And for the National Low Income Housing Coalition commands so much respect in your communities. This is very important. So we want to use the tax code, we want to use the appropriations process, we want to use the policy opportunities that we have, but we have to, the success we have with them is really dependent on the mobilization. So people know you have the money, the need is there, spend it. And there's been quite a pickup, and thanks to the administration for bringing clarity to some of the regs but the rules that go with this. So again, the reality is, we'll see what, I'm glad that you are weighing in with Maxine's legislation. She's very enthusiastic about it. She was the one who started this whole $46.5 billion. Without her, it would not be there. And there isn't a day that goes by that the air she breathes, the words she says, the steps she takes, isn't about providing more affordable housing on the ongoing, especially in time of pandemic and hurricanes and all the rest. I do have some, at the moment, just to say on the Build Back Better initiative, there are those in the country who are reflected by some in the Congress who want it to be a smaller program. So that's why some were trying to have us take up the infrastructure bill first. Take that up first, and then we'll take up the rest. Well, that would greatly diminish our leverage. This is the first time in the history of our country that America's children, especially America's poor children, have leverage in the debate. We are not yielding that leverage to rich people who do not want to pay taxes, so they want to shrink the program. Take up this first, you're diminished, your leverage is diminished. So I thank all of you who weighed in with that. I knew we would always survive because I believed, as I always do, that the unifying force in our caucus is the good for America's working families. It's a value that we share with the President of the United States. We can get great things done. We have our disagreements, as any family does, but at the end of the day, everybody came together to advance the cause so that we can, quickly as possible, do the reconciliation, as Diane said. Get in early with your concerns, because once the bill is written, the rules of budgeting are such that that's where the path that we are on. We establish our own path, so way in. So in any event, we have some big challenges that affect people in their daily lives. America's working families predominantly, and that's just about everybody that we're dealing with, except for the very high end. And we want the high end to pay their fair share. We're not begrudging anyone their success. We just want them to pay their fair share. So again, I'd like to give any clarification about how I think we go forward by hearing some of your questions. I'm here to listen, but I did want to share some thoughts about the pride I take in our caucus, the commitment they have to America's working families, and also how diverse they are, whether it's rural America, whether it's inner cities, whether it's exurbia, suburbia, rural, whatever it is, a different take, and we're listening, incorporating that. And again, thank you. I'm always very grateful to the National Low Income Housing Coalition for sending so many things that take me all day to go over all of them. But again, how we use the tax code, how we use our appropriated funds, how we establish our policy, how we build our public support. We couldn't do any of it without you. Thank you so much, Diane.
Well, thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi. I really appreciate your comments, and couldn't agree more that Chairwoman Waters is a tremendous champion for affordable housing for low-income renters, for people experiencing homelessness, as are you. And I wanted to just briefly, if we could, in the time we have left, talk a little bit more about each of the topics that you mentioned around eviction moratoriums, the ERA, and the reconciliation package and how we get that done. And on the eviction moratorium, we know that you are as deeply concerned about the millions of renters at risk of losing their homes in the coming months as we are. And we know that there are 6.5 million renter households who are at risk. And we're already hearing about spikes in eviction filings in Mississippi and Texas and other communities. And we're very concerned about the weeks and months ahead and what that will bring. And there's very clear and urgent need for new protections to be put in place to prevent evictions. As you said, as I shared, I know that the politics of Congress make enacting a broad eviction moratorium nearly impossible. We need 10 Senate Republicans to support a moratorium, and there are currently 0 that do so. So we are urging governors and mayors to act immediately to implement state and local eviction moratoriums and other protections for tenants. And we need and would love to see members of Congress, many are already, but more members of Congress, to pressure local elected officials to do the same, to have members of Congress can help to connect renters to local emergency rental assistance programs, to urge local courts to not allow evictions to proceed if a tenant has an application for emergency rental assistance that's pending, to really urge the ERA program administrators to simplify their programs, as the White House and the Department of Treasury have been urging them to do. So again, I want to thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your efforts last month for really leading an effort to get the House to pass an eviction moratorium, and to ask, what more you and other members of Congress can do with state and local elected officials to help prevent some of the evictions that we'll otherwise see.
President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. And I want to thank my colleague, Cori Bush, for making for public sentiment to work. People have to be aware of what is at stake. And I want to thank Cori Bush and others for just driving home how urgent this all was. Again, all of us represent a good chunk, just even if you talk about the Democrats. I mean, the Republicans will take credit for any help that goes into their areas, even though any of them vote for any of this. But I do think the bright light of transparency shining on these areas to show the examples. And I know Jean knows more about this than any of us. Will give some examples of where this is working. So there are examples of how the money is getting out faster. That's what we have to do, is get the money out. But again, we have to, like one of the things Maxine told me she had in the bill was that to use libraries or schools or other places where people could go, where there is the hookup, the technology, the broadband, so that people can sign up more easily. And that is a part of who is not being served, those who have not really weighed in. But not put a burden on them. Let's facilitate it for them. And this is a moment. You know, this is a moment. It's not just let's get through this and all. This is a moment where we can make progress as to how we respect housing as a right. You know, it really, when I was homeless, you gave me shelter. I see some things coming here about people with convictions. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. And thank you to the president for the executive, what we're doing in our bills, but also what the president's done by executive action for feeding people with the SNAP program and the initiatives he's put forth. So all these things are values that we have. We pray for the people in New Orleans, but I say we cannot allow some in Congress to pray on Sunday and pray, P-R-E-Y, on the rest of the week and exploit renters and everybody else who are out there. So again, know your power, transparency, shine the bright light, be respectful about how we can work together to get this done. Bring your suggestions to the table that you see as obstacles, and then we can address those which might have an unforeseen consequence. But we have to do this in a way that establishes a precedent for good practices as we go forward. And again, if we increase the stock of affordable housing, that's a good place to start. I'll just tell you, it breaks your heart to see these evictions on the streets. And you think, how could this possibly happen? How could it be? But when you think that 1 in 5 children in America goes to sleep hungry at night, or it lives in poverty, and that's what we're trying to do in our legislation, is reduce, as we have done, at least for the COVID time, cut by 1/2 the number of children in poverty. These are values issues about how we respect people. So how can we help? Shine the bright light and suggest or to the organizations, or have them suggest to us how we can further activate the organizations who have the trust and the competence of the people in their communities, because they're there with them all the time. And they speak the language, they understand the culture, they respect the people.
Yes, absolutely. And when it comes to the emergency rental assistance and helping to get it out faster and better, having some of those community-based organizations more involved in the process always means more effective emergency rental assistance programs. And as you said, you know, you and Chairwoman Waters showed this tremendous leadership in getting enough resources to pay the rent arrears that all tenants owe, which is what makes this moment so frustrating, so maddening, frankly, because that money is just not getting to tenants in time, and more needs to be done. And your team had asked that we share with you some of the biggest roadblocks that we see in getting the emergency rental assistance out. And you named some of this. You know, really, I mean, it's really important for everybody to recognize that some states and cities are getting it out. Some of them are doing it well, and they're getting it to tenants in time. They're keeping people stably housed, and which proves that it's possible and makes those that aren't all the more glaring and unacceptable. And the ones that aren't tend to have the really unnecessarily complicated applications. They require burdensome documentation, and many of them are struggling with capacity issues. We're also seeing many programs struggling with lack of landlord participation. Some landlords we're finding are seeing the hot rental market as a new incentive to evict tenants, raise rents, and make more money in the longer run. Those tend to be the larger, more corporate landlords. And for some of the smaller landlords, they have unlicensed or informal units and they're not able to access the funds. And the solutions to all of it are pretty simple, and they are all things that are clearly allowed under the law. They're all things that the White House and Treasury have urged communities to adopt, like simple applications, self-attestation, giving money directly to tenants when landlords refuse to participate. But we're finding that too many communities are essentially ignoring the White House directives. So if Congress does move forward with this legislation, we hope to see many of the things that are guidance and that are allowed become requirements. And I know that that's something that Chairwoman Waters and her team are looking at really closely. And I know we have you just for a few more minutes, Speaker Pelosi, so I would love to talk just a little bit more about the long-term solutions and the potential for $332 billion in housing investment in this reconciliation package, which is just, a lot of people have been saying it's once in a generation. I think it's more like once in a lifetime opportunity, and not just an opportunity to spend on housing investments, but to end homelessness if we spend the money right. You know, if we direct it to the lowest income and most marginalized people through expanded Section 8 vouchers, through expanding the National Housing Trust Fund, through repairing public housing capital repairs, all things that Chairwoman Waters has championed and that we strongly support. So would love to maybe in your final minutes to say more about what we as a network of advocates and impacted people and caring individuals can do to support your leadership in getting this bill across the finish line. Because I really believe if we get it right, this could be the beginning of the end of homelessness in our country.
I appreciate that, Diane. I thank the input that you have received from your members. Thank you all for what you have done, what you are doing, and what you will do as we go forward, because we do have to think long term. But right now, we're faced with a manifestation of a problem that who could have ever thought, a pandemic and all that that implies. I would say that we want results. We want results. So in order to try to help meet the needs of people, what President Biden put in there, and the direct payments and the child tax credit, which people are receiving now, we want to make it permanent as we go forward. So many ways to put money in people's pockets. Put money in people's pockets so that they can, and that's a pragmatic thing to do for the economy, because we are a consumer economy and these people need the money to, and they will spend it and it will inject demand into the economy, job creating. I have to say that we need really to get people vaccinated. I know we're talking about a longer term problem. We need to get people vaccinated and tested and the rest, because that we've got to solve the pandemic problem. And I know that ethnically or religiously or something, I'm respectful of anybody's reason why they aren't, except those who just reject science. Not that they have another reason. We really have to get people tested. It's a path to getting some of this other work done, because we said we were going to put vaccinations in the arms, money in the pockets, children safely in school, and people safely back to work, so that they can meet their needs, in addition to helping with the rent, which is a problem. And there are some mom and pop renters who have 3 units, and one they live in, one they live off of, and the other one they pay the mortgage on. They have their concerns that they bring to our members. And then, as you said, there's corporate who are, and it's more, but some of them in a more exploitative mode, not all, but some. Don't paint them all with the same brush. But they're not unhappy about people moving out so they can have other people move in. Some of them, that's what we hear. So let's just assume that we want to get the results as soon as possible. Right now, get that money, pay the rent, back rent, whatever it is, and let's move forward. And then we'll see, is it lack of cooperation on the part of the landlord, as I see in the chat, or in some cases, is it the caseworker didn't know how to use the software, as I see coming across here. Whatever it is, we want to anticipate, solve, and improve as we go forward so that we can bring results to people. We're not going to change everybody's behavior in one fell swoop, but we want them to get used to an idea where values matter, where ethical, our value system dominates, as well as having the vision that President Biden has, build back better for the people, for the children, with women, as we have in this bill. That we not only have that vision, we'll have a plan to get results as soon as possible. Again, some things that contribute to that success involve still getting people used to accepting the science, again, reaching out for help so that those who do understand the software could be, I'm so excited because, you know, I always objected to when the gospel says, what you did for the least of my brethren, you did for me. And I thought there's something wrong with that translation. This is not the least. This is all of us, who we are as a society, as a people, what you've done for these people who have most need, maybe we can say, but they are certainly not the least. So thank you, Diane, for what you all do. I know you're so values-based, so you have your vision, you have your knowledge, you know your stuff, your judgment is respected, you always have a plan to get it done. And again, that mobilization means everything. Know your power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi. Thank you for joining us again. You're always so generous with your time and your wisdom. And we so appreciate your leadership. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care. So we will turn now to our next speakers. And I'm really pleased to welcome back to today's call Gene Sperling. He's been on our national call several times now to always give important updates on the administration's efforts to expedite and improve emergency rental assistance, and on efforts, really aggressive, appropriately aggressive efforts to ensure that low-income renters are not evicted in the weeks and months to come. So today, Gene is joining us to talk about those efforts by the administration, recent efforts to prevent evictions, get ERA spent more quickly and efficiently, and many of the actions that Gene and the Treasury Secretary and President Biden have taken are those that NLIHC has recommended based on input from our partners and allies. So I'm again grateful for Gene and for the administration's willingness to listen and respond in really holistic and aggressive ways. Gene is formerly the head of the National Economic Council under Presidents Clinton and Obama, and he is now a senior advisor to President Biden, who appointed him to oversee the implementation of the nearly $2 trillion American Rescue Plan. So Gene, thanks so much for joining. I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me again. It is intimidating to be following somebody who is truly one of my heroes, which is Nancy Pelosi. And as someone who has seen her pass the Affordable Care Act and see what she has done right now, it's just extraordinary what her level of accomplishment will be. So thank you so much. I think that you know, it's an honor to be on here. When I come on, I try to be as direct and straight as possible, and to you know, make very clear how much we want advice, criticism, believe it or not, suggestions, anything to help us reach what is all of our goal, which is to prevent every unnecessary eviction, which is an unnecessary heartbreak and devastation to families and an extraordinary public health risk at this moment. I think all of us know that this has been a race with time. We have always felt that with the emergency rental assistance. The emergency rental assistance created an enormous opportunity and an enormous challenge. I mean, the opportunity is that we as a country have never had a national infrastructure for a humane eviction policy in our country. I have so much admiration for so many of you, because this has been an issue that has been too long on the back burner, and we have not had the infrastructure for this. And so the $46.5 billion through ERA-1 and ERA-2 creates, again, that opportunity and challenge, that opportunity to build that national infrastructure. And because it is money that is supposed to last over a few years, a chance to not just meet the crisis, but to build a lasting infrastructure for a humane eviction policy, but also to obviously meet the crisis that we face now. And that is where we have clearly been in a race with time. I mean, this legislation is asking all of us to help build that infrastructure through 430 separate jurisdictions in time to meet the demand that would come, particularly after the end of the eviction moratorium. And I think there's been, enormous efforts done in many places, and certainly by the advocates and people on the ground on this call. But we all know that we're not where we want to be. Because we obviously had to be building something new, and under this emergency situation, we have never taken the view that we were simply going to get the money out on time and say, we did that and we'll get a report in a year. We have been trying to understand, listen to what we could do through guidance, through persuasion, through whatever tool we had to seek to expedite the funds out there. I really, in April, we really surveyed. I really will say there was no organization more important, I think, than the Low-Income Housing Coalition in helping us to arrive on May 7th with major reforms on being able to give funding directly to tenants, to bulk payment, to ending discrimination against those who are already getting federal assistance, encouraging less paperwork, making clear money could be used for future housing. We came back on June 24th with more guidance to make clear that you could use funds for those already homeless, that would have future rental obligations, on bulk payment, on other areas. And again, as I'll talk about momentarily, additional guidance on the 25th. We also, as we got to the end of May, started realizing, again, from hearing from so many of you, that we had to do this hand in hand with getting reform in the way our courts deal with evictions. And so we started working on court diversion. This was hard because there were a few places doing this well. We had to try to spread the message everywhere. And so we started working with the Legal Service Corporation, the American Bar Association. We ended up pulling together 46 cities, mayors, offices, courts, et cetera, to try to push the court eviction diversion policies more nationwide. We thought it was a tremendous thing when the Associate Attorney General, Vanita Gupta, put out a letter to all courts. We saw this starting to move and make a difference. We came back and did more with those 46 cities. And then I think something very important happened. The Attorney General himself decided to take this up and called together the Supreme Court justices of every state. 35 showed up. And so you have a action coming from the highest levels of the Justice Department on an economic justice issue in ways that I think we have rarely seen. And I'm going to talk about our next step. Obviously, eviction moratorium extension was critical. We were able to extend the eviction moratorium to July 31st. And then we all watched the back and forth, but obviously Speaker Pelosi was one of the people who pushed the hardest, Cori Bush, many others, and the administration did move forward. It only lasted till the 26th, but every week counts. Every week saved lives, saved people from being from unnecessary and painful evictions. But look, the reality is we all know we're not where we need to be. Now, I don't think that it's fair for anyone to expect that $46.5 billion would have been out the door by now with the need that we have. But look at what Congress did say specifically. They said 65% of ERA 1 money should be out by September 30th. So at least you should be aiming that at least 16 billion should be out. At the rate we're going now, that's not going to be hit. At the rate you're going now, you'd get 8-9 billion, you'd get 50 to 60%. That is not enough. That means so many families, hundreds of thousands perhaps, not getting the protection Congress intended and everybody else wants to arrive at. Now, we all know that when you say numbers like 50%, that doesn't describe it, or 40%. As Diane said, this is a story of some places showing the leadership to come through and other places lagging. And so as we look at this right now, with the unfortunate Supreme Court ruling on the eviction moratorium, which was extremely disappointing, extremely painful, we have two basic strategies that we have to do. One is we have to do everything possible to speed up the emergency rental assistance everywhere, not just among the highest performers. And secondly, we still need, even with the national eviction moratorium being overturned, we still need to do everything we can to delay, divert, and prevent evictions from happening as the emergency rental assistance is still being set up. Today, the Urban Institute released an analysis which showed how much of a difference this could make. When you look at eviction moratoriums in state and cities, when you look at when a state or city says that once a person's applied for emergency rental assistance, they should not be, an eviction proceeding should be stayed against them. When you look at when a state or city says a locality cannot evict until their emergency rental assistance is up, when you look at that, you will see that about 40% of renters who are behind do have some additional protection, 40%. So we need to fight on both. We need to do everything we can on both tracks, speeding up emergency rental assistance and getting the state and local, and to the degree we can, federal actions that delay and divert and deny evictions until the emergency rental assistance is up and going everywhere, and until we are through, particularly this acceleration of the Delta variant and the public health risk. So let me say a bit about, let me say a little bit about what we're doing in each of those areas. While I'm on the issue of the eviction diversion programs, today, the Attorney General, well, first of all, last Friday, you saw 3 different cabinet members, Secretary of Treasury, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of HUD, make very broad calls to states and cities on immediate action. Those included not only getting the ERA funds out quickly, but it called for state and local moratoriums. It called for staying eviction proceedings against those who had applied for emergency rental assistance. Today, you saw another action. The Attorney General, very much in the spirit of the Kennedy-esque call in the early 60s to the bar to step up and provide representation to civil rights protesters. You saw the Attorney General today make an overall call to the legal profession to step up and provide the assistance that is needed for equal justice, for making sure the emergency rental assistance is getting out, and ensuring that those going through evictions or are at risk of evictions have counsel, have representation, have help. This call started being planned on Friday. By today, 42 deans of law schools across the country, from Harvard and Yale to Houston and University of South Carolina, committed that they would be using their clinics, their students, to tie into protections for eviction prevention. The Pro Bono Council immediately responded and are planning now to have a training, which we believe will have over 1,000 lawyers on it, on how they can help. We are going to need your help on this, because it doesn't do good unless we can connect people to legal service agencies who are doing the work, to the nonprofits, to people like yourself. So one of the things that we should do now that we have this call from the Attorney General is we need to work together with all of you, Diane, with your help, with Seamus's help and others, to ensure that we are now figuring out, with this influx of legal help, how we pair them with the court systems, with the legal services, with the nonprofits that are helping with assistance, representing people in courts, and help funding the court diversion programs. The other thing we all have to do is, we can go back to Congress and try to get more funding or get different funding, but the American Rescue Plan, which is $350 billion, can be used, any of it, to help support court diversion plans, navigator plans, legal services, right to counsel. Every single thing that everyone here would like to do can be funded by state and local funds, in addition to the 10% from the emergency rental assistance. And I think we all have to make that more clear. Courts are telling us they need to actually get the funding. People are saying if they could have more community participation, more nonprofit participation. Yes, we're looking for philanthropic funds, but we have federal funds available, and we would be happy to figure out how to work with you to make more clear that those funds would get out. Now, this, of course, brings to the last issue, and then I'll turn it over to Noel to give a little more detail, which is, why is this program working so well in some places where we have true local leadership and not in others? I mean, if Louisville has over 100% of their funds out, if San Antonio has 92%, if Harris County has 92%, it is because they are using the flexibilities, they are using self-attestation, simple forms. They're working with nonprofits. They're working with this courts. As Diane said, it's just, if this program can work so well in some places, there's no reason it can't work well everywhere. There are 70 jurisdictions that are over 50% of their ERA funds by July. Well ahead of pace to be over 65% by the end of September. So, for us, we have done a lot of the outreach many of you do. We hear a lot of the issues. We have tried to respond. There is no doubt that there is an excessive cautiousness and conservatism among many of the grantees. They are overly cautious, and we have tried to give them the confidence in many ways by public statements people like myself make, that Noel makes, that the deputy secretary makes. By Noel has put out application forms that are simple, that use self-attestation, and saying, we, the Treasury Department, approve of these. We are putting things on the website. All of these we feel should give people more confidence. But we kept doing deep dive, and what we would hear more and more is, well, we heard a couple different things. Well, we understand we can do it, but we're not sure our state auditor does. Well, we had problems in other programs. Or a main issue we heard was that people knew they could do self-attestation, but they had to try 3 different things first. So they, would wait 2 weeks for documentation, then do a call. It was almost by plan, it was going to take 6 weeks. So Noel and I were on a call with a few places, and they were saying, can you just say more clearly what you've already said? So, we said, look, let's not be proud. We're pointing to the fact that many cities are making this work. They get it. But if it helps to be more clear, we will be more clear. So August 25th was putting out as clear as you can. You can do self-attestation for all 3 eligibility criteria. You can do self-attestation off your initial application. You do not have to go through a 4-step, 6-week process. We put other things in there that we had heard from people, including those on this call, allowing tenants to have funds paid for at their request for places they'd already left, so that they did not have the burden of lack of payment or evictions keeping them from getting new homes. We've made clear, and this is, I think, important for this group of people on this call, that you can have a nonprofit do more instant payments to people who are at risk of eviction, and the nonprofit can have up to 6 months to help fill the documentation. If there is a threat of a surge of evictions, this is a way of surging relief that we want to discuss with you in this. So we want to make clear, this is not, this was never something where we had all the sticks and carrots we might have liked at the beginning, but whatever powers we've had in guidance and persuasion, in pushing, we are trying to use. I will say that virtually everything we have done has been partly the result of the advice and the criticism and the pushing from people on this call. And we want to hear from you. I've done this before. I'll do it again. You don't have to wonder how to get through to us. I have one email address. It is eugene.b.sperling, eugene.b as in boy, .sperling at who.eop.gov. eugene.b.sperling at who.eop.gov. We want to hear from you. And we, the one thing I will say too, as to why our efforts are so important, it is a frustration to me that we spend so much time on the phone with local leaders pushing. Why don't they want to push on their own? Why are there not more like the mayors of Louisville and San Antonio and others who are taking responsibility? Because when you have that leadership, that overcomes as much of the cautiousness and excessive cautiousness as any guidance we can give. But we will do everything that we can. One thing I'm going to turn to is going to be my transition to Noel, is we also really think we all need to fight back against what is a double standard on self-attestation. I work on all the American Rescue Plans. There is self-attestation being strongly supported in the PPP for those with loans under 150,000. Think about that compared to the fact that here the self-attestation is often $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. That there is really no evidence to suggest that having an efficient, simple, streamlined plan leads to more fraud. So we should fight back on that, and we should fight hard. And my last thing is to say, maybe for a lot of people, this wasn't their front burner issue. If there is any upside, and I don't think there is much of an upside to the end of eviction moratorium, but if there is anything, it is that this now makes this front and center. So even if we've reached out to cities and states and county officials, now is the time where the rubber has hit the road for them. And so now is the time to push even harder, even if we've pushed before. Let me turn to Noel. Noel has just been done round the clock yeoman's work is the one who is on the front lines running the application of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And he'll be here for Q&A with me. But Noel, you might want to go a little deeper before we start on some of the recent guidance that Treasury has put out.
Thank you, Gene. I'll be brief. I know our time is limited, but on the issue of self-attestation, that is the big news out of what we've done in this last set of guidance that we released last week. And as Gene rightly described, we're trying to meet organizations where they are, state and local grantees. We could be sort of stepping back and saying, look, it was already written there. You can do this. Failure is not an option, right? Failure ends in an eviction. And so we are doing everything we can. And if that requires being more clear in the guidance, we'll be more clear in the guidance. I've spent an enormous amount of time on the phone with state and local grantees just since we released it to say, look, here it is. This is what people asked for. Here it is. We really are seeing that in this sort of ongoing dialogue, we're seeing change. We're seeing, even if it's moving much slower than we would want, I'm talking to grantees that are implementing things that we made possible in May. And I would have loved for them to implement that in May. But when they do it, they see how it transforms their program. And Gene hit something that's just so important here, which is that there has been a lot of discussion about equating self-attestation, better streamlined programs with fraud. And we are not seeing that correlation. Some of the strongest anti-fraud programs in this country are with grantees that are actually leaning into the flexibility. Much of the best anti-fraud work is done through back-end databases where folks can run information through that and flag things. And I think Gene really hit it well when he pointed to the fact that connecting it with fraud is also about questioning or raising the question about who do we believe in this country? When they sign and they say, this is my situation, I think we can believe low-income people, and particularly so many low-income people of color, right, who come and say, I need this help. This is something that Congress appropriated to serve my household, that we can create reasonable systems that rely on people's words and that allow us to also build the appropriate structures to ensure that fraud doesn't exist. But I think to equate with people giving their word that opens up more fraud, I think it's something we really ought to look in the mirror and ask a question about. And we really should be asking much more pointedly, what are the investments that are being made in strong anti-fraud programs that rely on all the most modern IT that's available, especially to the largest programs in the country. So I feel strongly about underlining that point that Gene said. And I'll finish by just saying, please look in the FAQs at ways in which we have pointed to faster payments. So many people are stuck trying to avoid an eviction. And so working with nonprofits, working with landlords where you can make payments up front to really prevent those evictions. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you both so much again for all of your work on this, for all of your partnership on all of this, and thanks for the really helpful overview. I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sarah Sadian in just a minute to do just a couple of questions and answers with you both if you have time. I'm going to have to excuse myself because I'm about to get on a press conference call with Majority Whip James Clyburn, who is getting ready to hold some oversight hearings on the bottom spenders for emergency rental assistance for those 7 slowest spenders. So I think there's multiple people working on this in multiple ways, but I just briefly want to say, one, I hope you take a look at all the chat and Q&A because there's a tremendous amount of gratitude for what you've done already and ideas for what more needs to be done. There's a lot of feedback here, and that which I talked about with you both about the need for safe harbor for program administrators who continue to be overly cautious because they worry about an audit at the end of the day. There's a lot of eagerness, I think, beyond the carrots for some sticks. You all have put out very good, very clear guidance about what programs ought to do. Many of them still aren't. So what are the consequences for those program administrators? Which gets to the question that I'll ask you now, and feel free to, of course, to comment on either of those. But what can you tell folks on this call about recapturing and reallocating funds? Clearly, the time for that opportunity is coming soon, and there's a lot of eagerness from, I'd say, all places, from tenants, from program administrators and beyond, about what is that going to look like, and how can we do it in a way that protects tenants and gives entities that could be much more effective at getting this money out faster an opportunity to do so. And then, so thank you both very much. And I'm going to turn it to Sarah Sadian to moderate the remaining Q&A. Thank you.
Gene, do you want me to jump on that one?
I'll make a couple of comments, which is to say, it is the one stick in the legislation. And we have seen that it has gotten people's attention. We have been involved ourselves in talking to states and cities where the numbers are not out at what we want. I'll be clear. There are some times when you were talking with people who are running these programs where they are sincere, they're conscientious, but they are just not treating it like the emergency that it is. And so the fact that 65%, again, if everybody met 65%, as the law said, you'd have $16.5 billion out by the end of September. That would be a significant improvement, and that would meet a lot of need, as we all know. And we know many are behind. And I think the fact that that has people's attention is a positive thing. And I think it creates a greater sense of leverage and even more pressure to accelerate. You would like to think that the end of the eviction moratorium itself has created that pressure. I think I'll let Noel say something. I think we probably both do not want to get too far ahead of the Deputy Secretary of Treasury, because he is taking significant responsibility in this issue. But I'd say the following, which is, of course, we want to use this to help more people get emergency rental relief quickly. This is not something you want to use arbitrarily against somebody who is successfully, we're going to be looking not just at the number, but the effort. If you are doing all the right things, if you are moving fast, if you are simplifying, using a simplified form, self-attestation, working with your courts, working with your nonprofits, of course, we're not out to use this arbitrarily. We're also not out to use it in a way that would punish residents of a slow performing jurisdiction. But to the degree that it can be used to go to higher performers who are more committed, who are seeing this as the emergency it is, I am quite sure that is the that this is a tool that we will be willing to use. I will also say that this is one thing where obviously there is still work being done. And again, as I said, the Deputy Secretary is taking personal responsibility for that. So this is also something where we can use your advice and counsel as it's being developed. But Noel, do you want to add or subtract from that?
No, Gene, you've hit it straight on. We will be releasing guidance, obviously, this month on this, and clearly looking to strike that balance between ensuring that we use this policy opportunity to ultimately get more money to the people who need it, right? This is not a gotcha game. This is not a punishment game, even where we feel like, we wish people would move faster. This is about getting money to the people that Congress and that statute are pointing to. And you'll see that reflected in our guidance.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure in the coming week, this week, we plan to send you a letter with some recommendations around the recapture process and how to use that, exactly to your point. How do you use that to encourage states and localities to adopt best practices or have put together performance improvement plans if they're not spending at the level that they need to. So be on the lookout for that as we go on. I do see some questions about how some states are suggesting that they don't need emergency rental assistance dollars, but of course we know that funds can also be used to help people who are experiencing homelessness that they might not be taking into consideration. Can you share with us anything that you're doing to encourage states to go back and either work with their COCs or homeless service providers to make sure that those households are also receiving assistance?
Well, to give you, I'll start and go to Noel, but to give you a particular case where the people on this call had a significant influence on us was that on the May 7th guidance, we made extremely clear, like we foresaw that people might be saying this. So one of the guidance there really put together everything to say, you can use this funding to help people get new housing, for the security deposit, for the moving costs, for the initial rent. And the question that came back to us was, and it was from Diane and others, was we heard from several of people on this call, that was great, but it's not clear that you can use it for somebody who's already homeless because they don't have a rental obligation. And I thought Noel and Treasury, were smart and creative, but legally sound in making clear that the funds could be used for a future rental obligation. So I think we have tried to get this out. I think this is also another area to be very clear where people can use state and local funds, because purchasing things, et cetera, even if something's not technically eligible under the emergency rental assistance, almost anything that was necessary can be used by the state and local funds. And we've seen places like Milwaukee and other places where they've realized they can use both pots of money. But I think that's something we do more. And again, too, I like to say to people, if you build it, we will come. If you, want to put together something that addresses this issue and have us focus on this, you will have Noel and I and Erica and others working on this there. But Noel?
I'll simply add that we've done roundtables with COCs and with homelessness advocates to understand how can we do this better, more effectively. But absolutely, we hope that the letter of intent process that we created, by which a grantee would qualify a household and then give them a letter that indicates the amount of money that can be paid to the landlord, that this can, in combination with the existing structures that are in place oftentimes through COCs, continuum of care networks, can make a meaningful difference. And obviously, all of these things always in coordination with or with wraparound services, because households that are facing homelessness or experiencing homelessness are in crisis, and we need to make sure that those services are in place.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm no Diane, but I will graciously extend our appreciation to you for all of the work that you've done over the last several months and working very closely with all of us to implement recommendations that we've made and help make improvements, respond to program administrators, respond to advocates. We really think that the administration has done a tremendous job in providing the flexibility that states and local governments need to ramp up these programs and serve households in needs. And now it really falls on state and local governments to step up and do the work that needs to get done to get assistance into the hands of renters and landlords. So we really appreciate all of your efforts. And I want to thank everybody for joining our call today. We'll see you all next week and talk to you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you.